If he gets on his knees, I quit. The words cut through the hotel lobby so sharply that even the piano player missed a note. Conversations died mid-sentence. Crystal glasses hovered halfway to lips. Heads turned. For a moment, the entire room seemed to stop breathing. The Grand Hayes Hotel was the kind of place where silence usually belonged to wealth. 40-foot ceilings shimmered beneath imported chandeliers. Marble floors reflected warm golden light. Luxury SUVs lined the entrance outside, their polished surfaces catching the glow of a Manhattan evening that smelled faintly of rain. Inside, investors, celebrities, and executives moved through the lobby with practiced confidence, each convinced they belonged there. Michael Reed did not. At least that was what everyone seemed to think. The 68-year-old delivery driver stood near the revolving doors holding a cardboard package against his chest. His gray jacket looked older than most of the guests in the room. His work boots carried traces of dust from a long day on the road. His thinning silver hair was damp from the weather outside. He looked tired, invisible, easy to dismiss, which was exactly why nobody stepped forward when the accusation came. "You scratched my car." The voice belonged to Victor Langford, a real estate developer known almost as much for his ego as his money. He stood beside two business associates, pointing a finger toward Michael as if presenting evidence before a jury. "You backed that delivery cart right into my Bentley." A murmur spread through the crowd. Several people glanced toward the windows where the black luxury sedan sat parked beneath the hotel entrance lights. Michael blinked in confusion. "Sir, I never touched your vehicle." His voice was calm, respectful. The voice of a man who had spent decades solving problems without creating them. "Are you calling me a liar?" Victor stepped closer. "Because I know exactly what I saw." Michael tightened his grip on the package. "I'm saying I didn't hit your car." Victor laughed. Not because anything was funny. Because humiliation always sounds easier when wrapped in a smile. "You people never take responsibility." A few uncomfortable chuckles emerged from nearby guests. Others looked away. Nobody wanted involvement. Nobody wanted conflict. Nobody wanted to risk upsetting a man who donated to charities and appeared on magazine covers. The hotel manager arrived moments later, moving quickly through the growing crowd. His expression carried the nervous look of someone trying to protect an important client. "Is there a problem here?" Victor answered before anyone else could speak. "Yes. This driver damaged my vehicle and refuses to admit it." The manager turned toward Michael. His eyes lingered on the worn jacket, the work boots, the cardboard box. A judgment formed instantly. "Sir, perhaps it would be best if you apologized and we resolved this quietly." Michael stared at him. The disappointment on his face seemed heavier than anger. "Apologize for something I didn't do?" "Sometimes," Victor interrupted, "a little humility goes a long way." Then he smiled toward the audience gathering around them. Maybe he should get on his knees and say sorry. The laughter came easier this time. Not loud. Not cruel enough to sound obvious. Just enough to let Michael know he was standing alone. The old driver lowered his eyes for a moment. Not in surrender. In exhaustion. The kind that comes from years of being underestimated. Years of knowing that truth often loses when status enters the room. Then a chair scraped across marble. A woman stepped forward from the restaurant entrance carrying a serving tray. Her white uniform was simple, elegant, professional. Her blonde hair was pulled neatly into a low ponytail. Her name tag read Emily Carter, 26 years old. Waitress. Invisible to most people in the lobby only minutes earlier. But not anymore. She placed the tray onto a nearby table and looked directly at Victor. "If he gets on his knees," she said, her voice steady enough to freeze the room. "I quit." Silence crashed over the lobby. Victor stared at her. The manager looked horrified. Several guests exchanged nervous glances. Emily didn't move, didn't look away, didn't soften her words. Somewhere above them, hidden behind dark glass overlooking the lobby, a man in a tailored navy suit stood perfectly still. Alexander Hayes, billionaire owner of the hotel, watched the entire scene unfold without saying a single word. No one spoke for several seconds. The silence lingered beneath the chandeliers like a storm cloud that refused to move. Emily Carter remained exactly where she stood, her shoulders straight, her eyes fixed on Victor Langford. She was not trying to win an argument. She was not trying to embarrass anyone. She simply refused to let another human being be treated as less than human. Around her, Guests shifted uneasily. Some pretended to check their phones. Others stared at the marble floor. It was easier that way. Looking away always felt safer than choosing a side. Michael Reed stood quietly beside the revolving doors. The package in his hands suddenly seemed much heavier than before. He had spent most of his life working jobs that people barely noticed. Driving delivery trucks, carrying supplies, fixing problems before anyone realized they existed. For 40 years he had shown up before sunrise and returned home after dark. Yet standing in that luxury hotel, surrounded by people wearing watches worth more than his truck, he felt smaller than he had in years. Not because he lacked dignity, because too many people had decided he lacked value. The Grand Hayes Hotel had seen countless galas, business summits, and celebrity events. Wealth flowed through the building like electricity. Yet the most important person in the room at that moment was not a billionaire, an investor, or a famous guest. It was the tired delivery driver everyone had ignored 5 minutes earlier. Outside, rain tapped softly against the massive glass windows overlooking Manhattan. The city lights blurred into streaks of gold and silver. Limousines arrived beneath the covered entrance. Valets moved quickly through the evening air. Life continued as if nothing unusual had happened. But inside the lobby, everything had changed. Because once someone chooses courage, everyone else must decide what kind of person they are. Victor recovered first. His smile returned, though it looked thinner now. Less confident. "You are willing to throw away your job for a stranger?" he asked. Emily answered without hesitation. "I am willing to stand up for someone being treated unfairly." Several guests exchanged glances. The words landed harder than anyone expected. Fairness was easy to applaud in speeches and corporate brochures. It became much more uncomfortable when someone demanded it in real life. The hotel manager stepped forward nervously. Sweat glistened along his forehead. "Emily, perhaps we should discuss this privately." She shook her head. "There is nothing private about what happened." Michael looked toward her. There was genuine confusion in his eyes now. He did not understand why she was helping him. Most people would have stayed silent. Most people would have protected their paycheck. Yet here she was risking everything for a man whose name she had not even known 10 minutes earlier. High above the lobby, behind a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the scene, Alexander Hayes remained motionless. His office occupied the top level of the hotel. The view stretched across midtown Manhattan for miles. Yet he was not looking at the skyline. He was watching the lobby below. Watching Emily. Watching Michael. Watching the dozens of people who suddenly seemed unsure of themselves. Alexander had spent 20 years building an empire. Hotels, resorts, conference centers, thousands of employees, millions of guests. He understood profit. He understood competition. He understood power. What interested him tonight was something far more difficult to measure. Character. The kind that appears when there is no reward attached. Back downstairs, Michael finally spoke. His voice was quiet but steady. "Miss, you do not have to do this." Emily turned toward him. For the first time, a small smile appeared on her face. "Actually, I do." Michael stared at her. "Why?" She looked at him for a moment before answering. "Because somebody should have." The words settled over the crowd like falling snow. Simple. Honest. Impossible to argue with. Somewhere in the back of the lobby, a woman lowered her phone after recording the exchange. Another guest folded his arms thoughtfully. A valet near the entrance stopped walking long enough to listen. Little by little, something invisible was shifting inside the room. Not everyone agreed. Not everyone suddenly became brave. But the certainty that Victor had enjoyed only minutes earlier was beginning to crack. And for the first time since the accusation began, Michael Reed no longer looked alone. The lobby remained frozen in a strange kind of tension. Not loud. Not chaotic. Just heavy. Like the air itself was waiting for something. Victor Langford glanced around and noticed the change before anyone else did. The smiles he expected were gone. The easy support he usually enjoyed had faded. People were no longer looking at him as the successful developer who controlled billion-dollar projects. They were looking at him as the man arguing with an aging delivery driver while a young waitress defended him. The picture suddenly felt less flattering. Victor cleared his throat. "This is becoming ridiculous." His voice echoed across the marble floor. "I am the one whose property was damaged." Yet even as he spoke, fewer people seemed convinced. Emily stood quietly beside Michael. She had said what she needed to say. Now she simply remained present. Sometimes courage was not speaking. Sometimes courage was refusing to leave. Michael shifted the package under his arm and looked toward the floor. The attention made him uncomfortable. He had never wanted a crowd. He had never wanted a confrontation. He only wanted to finish a delivery and return home before the weather worsened. The package contained specialty medical equipment requested by a conference guest staying in the hotel. Important enough to require personal delivery. Not important enough, apparently, for anyone to care about the man carrying it. But that was nothing new. Michael Reed had spent years becoming invisible. Long before he drove delivery routes across New York City, he had worn a different uniform. One that earned respect. One that made strangers nod with appreciation. For 27 years he had worked as a firefighter. Through snowstorms, blackouts, floods, and emergencies that most people only watched on television. He had entered buildings when others ran away from them. He had missed birthdays, holidays, and family dinners because someone somewhere needed help. He never spoke much about those years. Heroes rarely do. Then life changed. Retirement arrived. Medical bills followed. His wife, Diane, became sick. The treatments were expensive. Insurance covered some expenses, but not all of them. Savings disappeared one check at a time. By the time Diane passed away 3 years earlier, the comfortable future they had planned together was gone. Michael sold their house. Downsized. Started over. Most mornings now began before 5 o'clock. He loaded deliveries into an aging truck and spent 12 hours navigating traffic. Not because he loved the work. Because dignity meant paying your own way when you still could. None of the people standing in the Grand Hayes Hotel knew any of that. They saw old boots. They saw wrinkles. They saw a delivery driver. They did not see the man who had spent decades serving complete strangers. Emily did not know the details either. Not yet. But she recognized something familiar in his expression. She recognized pride. Quiet pride. The kind carried by people who have endured more than they discuss. The kind her mother used to carry. A memory surfaced unexpectedly. Emily was 17 again, sitting in a hospital cafeteria with a paper cup of coffee growing cold in her hands. Her father had recently left. Medical debt had swallowed nearly everything. Her mother worked double shifts as a nursing assistant while battling exhaustion nobody else seemed to notice. One afternoon, a patient family member had spoken to her mother with unnecessary cruelty. Emily remembered standing nearby, waiting for someone to step in. Nobody did. Not supervisors. Not coworkers. Not witnesses. People looked away because looking away was easier. That moment never left her. Neither did the lesson attached to it. Decency survives only when someone chooses to practice it. Back in the present, Emily looked at Michael and understood something simple. Everyone deserved someone willing to speak when the room became silent. Above them, Alexander Hayes rested one hand against the office window. The city lights reflected faintly across the glass. Most executives would have called security by now. Most owners would have worried about public relations. Alexander found himself focused on a different question. Why was one waitress showing more leadership than half the executives who rented conference space in his hotel? Down below, the crowd continued growing. Guests lingered. Employees watched discreetly from reception desks and hallway entrances. The story had become bigger than a scratched car. Bigger than a disagreement. Without realizing it, everyone in the lobby had begun witnessing a test of character. The only problem was that nobody yet understood who was truly being tested. Alexander Hayes had learned long ago that the most revealing moments in business never happened inside boardrooms. They happened when nobody thought they were being evaluated. Through the glass of his private office, he watched the lobby below with growing interest. Victor Langford was exactly the kind of guest most luxury hotels try to keep happy. Wealthy, influential, connected. The sort of man whose complaints could trigger emergency meetings and carefully worded apologies. Yet tonight, the person commanding Alexander's attention was not the millionaire demanding respect. It was the waitress refusing to abandon hers. He stepped away from the window and crossed the office in silence. The room reflected decades of success. Walnut shelves lined the walls. Framed awards sat beneath soft lighting. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Manhattan stretching toward the horizon. Yet Alexander barely noticed any of it. His thoughts remained fixed on the lobby. A memory surfaced unexpectedly. 22 years earlier, before the private jets and luxury resorts, he had worked nights unloading supply trucks behind a hotel in Chicago. The pay had been modest. The hours exhausting. One winter evening, A guest had mistaken him for someone beneath notice and spoken to him accordingly. What Alexander remembered most was not the insult. It was the manager who witnessed it and said nothing. Success had eventually changed his bank account. It had never erased that lesson. Meanwhile, downstairs, Victor sensed the momentum slipping away. The crowd was no longer reacting the way he expected. He checked faces around him and found uncertainty where agreement had once been. That unsettled him. People with power often grow uncomfortable when it stops working. "This entire situation is absurd," he announced loudly. "We are standing here discussing feelings instead of facts." The statement sounded reasonable at first. That was what made it effective. Several guests nodded cautiously. Facts sounded objective. Fair. Safe. Emily listened carefully. Then she asked a simple question. "What fact proves he damaged your car?" The lobby grew quiet again. Victor blinked. For a second, he seemed surprised someone had challenged the assumption. The fact that he was near it. Emily folded her arms. Being nearby is not proof. A few guests exchanged glances. Others looked toward Michael. The old driver remained still, almost uncomfortable with the attention. He had spent his life solving practical problems. He was not accustomed to becoming one. The hotel manager cleared his throat. Perhaps everyone should calm down. But calm was not the issue anymore. The issue was truth. Near the reception desk, a young concierge named Daniel shifted nervously. He had witnessed part of the incident from across the lobby. Since the confrontation began, he had remained silent. Not because he agreed with Victor, because speaking up felt risky. He glanced toward Emily, then toward Michael, then back toward the floor. His conscience and his fear were having an argument. Emily noticed him. So did Michael. The old driver offered the young employee a small nod. Nothing dramatic, just quiet reassurance. The gesture surprised Daniel. Here was the man being accused, the man facing humiliation, somehow comforting someone else. Above them, rain continued tapping against the windows. The sound blended with distant traffic and the faint hum of the city beyond the hotel walls. Time seemed to stretch. Every second increased the pressure. Every second demanded a choice. Daniel inhaled slowly. Then he raised his hand. "Actually," he said, his voice barely louder than a conversation. The room turned toward him instantly. Victor frowned. The manager looked alarmed. Daniel swallowed. Hard but continued. "I was at the front desk when the delivery arrived." His pulse raced. "And I remember something important." For the first time that evening, uncertainty crossed Victor Langford's face. Not annoyance. Not frustration. Uncertainty. Because truth has a strange habit. It often arrives quietly. And when it does, the loudest voices in the room suddenly become very interested in silence. Every eye in the lobby shifted toward Daniel. The young concierge looked as though he wished he could disappear into the polished marble behind the reception desk. His hands trembled slightly. Not because he was unsure of what he had seen. Because he understood exactly who he was about to contradict. Victor Langford folded his arms and forced a smile. "Go ahead," he said. "Tell everyone what you think you remember." The wording was careful, deliberate. Not what you saw. What you think you remember. Daniel recognized the tactic immediately. Doubt was easier to create than truth. He swallowed and looked toward Michael. The older man stood quietly, offering no pressure, no expectation. Just patience. Somehow that made it easier. When Mr. Reed arrived, Daniel began. He parked his delivery cart near the entrance while waiting for security clearance. The lobby remained silent. Even the piano music from the restaurant seemed distant now. "I remember because I helped verify the delivery paperwork." Victor shifted his weight. "And," Daniel continued, "the cart never came within 15 feet of your vehicle." A ripple moved through the crowd. Small, subtle, but impossible to miss. Victor's smile faded for half a second before returning. 15 feet, he replied. "You measured it?" A few people chuckled nervously. Daniel almost backed down. Almost. Then something unexpected happened. Emily stepped forward. Not to answer for him. Not to rescue him. Simply to stand beside him. The gesture was small, but powerful. Suddenly Daniel did not feel alone. "No, sir," he said. "I did not measure it. But I was watching because the entrance was busy." The cart stayed near the security lane the entire time. The hotel manager rubbed his forehead. The situation was becoming increasingly uncomfortable. Not because of conflict, because the narrative was changing. And changing narratives often reveal uncomfortable truths. Victor pointed toward Michael. Then how do you explain the scratch? Michael finally spoke. I cannot explain something I did not cause. His voice remained calm. No anger. No accusation. Just honesty. The simplicity of the answer seemed to frustrate Victor more than any argument could have. Across the lobby, more guests were beginning to pay attention. A woman attending a finance conference quietly lowered her phone and whispered to a colleague. A businessman waiting for a car service stopped pretending to read emails. Even hotel staff who normally avoided guest disputes were now listening. Truth has gravity. People are drawn toward it whether they intend to be or not. Above them, Alexander Hayes entered a private elevator descending from the executive floor. He remained silent as the doors closed. Silent as the elevator moved downward. Silent as numbers illuminated one by one. Yet his expression had changed. He had watched enough leaders over the years to recognize a pattern. People often reveal their character when things go wrong, but they reveal it even faster when they believe nobody can challenge them. Back in the lobby, Victor glanced around and realized the room no longer belonged to him. Control was slipping. Not dramatically, quietly, like sand through open fingers. This is ridiculous, he muttered. All this over a simple scratch. Emily looked directly at him. Then why are you asking someone innocent to apologize for it? The question landed harder than any speech. Victor opened his mouth, but no answer came immediately. Around him, people waited. For the first time all evening, they were not waiting to hear from the wealthiest person in the room. They were waiting for the truth. Daniel took a slow breath. Then he remembered one more detail. Something he had not considered important until now. His eyes widened slightly. Actually, he said, there is something else. The crowd turned toward him again. The young concierge pointed toward the ceiling. The entrance cameras record everything. The silence that followed felt different from all the others. This one carried possibility. Because opinions could be debated. Assumptions could be challenged. But cameras had no interest in status, money, or reputation. They simply recorded what happened. And suddenly, for the first time that night, the answer seemed only moments away. The moment Daniel mentioned the cameras, the atmosphere shifted completely. It was subtle at first. A glance here, a raised eyebrow there. But within seconds, the confidence that had surrounded Victor Langford all evening began to fade. Facts were no longer theoretical. Answers were no longer distant. Somewhere inside the hotel's security system, the truth already existed. The only question was whether anyone was willing to look at it. The hotel manager straightened his tie and looked toward the reception desk. Can we access the entrance footage? His voice sounded different now. Less concerned about pleasing an important guest. More concerned about resolving a situation that had grown far beyond a customer complaint. Daniel nodded immediately. Yes, sir. Security archives everything. Victor forced a laugh. Fine. Pull the footage. He spread his hands dramatically. I have nothing to hide. Yet several people noticed the way his jaw tightened afterward. Emily noticed. Michael noticed. And somewhere in the back of the crowd, a few guests exchanged knowing looks. Confidence often sounds different when it is real. The manager made a call. Within minutes, a security supervisor arrived carrying a tablet connected to the hotel's surveillance network. The crowd instinctively moved closer. Nobody wanted to miss what happened next. Even employees who should have been working found reasons to remain nearby. The supervisor scrolled through timestamps carefully. Rain tapped softly against the glass walls as everyone waited. 30 seconds felt like 5 minutes. Finally, he located the correct recording. Here, he said. The screen displayed the entrance from earlier that evening. The image was clear, sharp, unemotional. Unlike people, cameras did not take sides. The supervisor pressed play. The lobby fell silent. On the screen, Michael appeared pushing his delivery cart toward the entrance exactly as Daniel had described. He stopped near the designated security lane. He waited patiently while paperwork was verified. Every movement looked calm and routine. Victor folded his arms. Keep watching. The footage continued. Guests entered. Valets moved vehicles. Employees crossed the frame. Michael remained where he was supposed to be. The cart never approached Victor's Bentley. Not once. A murmur swept through the crowd. Victor shifted uncomfortably. There must be another angle. The supervisor nodded. There is. He switched to a second camera overlooking the driveway. This angle showed Victor's vehicle parked beneath the hotel canopy. Everyone leaned forward. The recording rolled backwards several minutes, then forward again. And suddenly the answer appeared. A valet maneuvering another luxury vehicle had opened a passenger door against a concrete planter near the curb. The contact was slight, barely noticeable, but enough to create the mark now being blamed on Michael. The entire lobby went silent. Not shocked silence. Certain silence. The kind that arrives when confusion disappears. Daniel stared at the screen. Emily exhaled slowly. Michael simply lowered his eyes for a moment, as though relieved more than vindicated. He had never wanted victory. He only wanted the truth. Victor's face lost color. That cannot be right. But nobody answered. Nobody needed to. The footage spoke for itself. For several seconds, all anyone could hear was the soft hum of the air conditioning and distant traffic outside. Then an older woman standing near the elevators shook her head. The man was telling the truth all along. Her words carried farther than she intended. Suddenly, other voices began emerging. Quiet conversations. Uncomfortable observations. Questions nobody had been willing to ask earlier. Why had everyone assumed Michael was guilty? Why had nobody asked for evidence first? Why had it taken a waitress and a young concierge to do what dozens of successful people would not? Above all, why had the easiest target become the first suspect? Emily looked toward Michael. The old driver offered a small smile. Not triumphant. Not proud. Just grateful. Grateful that someone had listened. Grateful that someone had cared enough to ask questions before passing judgment. Across the room, the private elevator doors opened with a soft chime. Several guests turned instinctively. A tall man in a navy suit stepped into the lobby. Conversations stopped immediately. Employees straightened. Recognition spread through the crowd. Alexander Hayes had finally come downstairs. And judging by the expression on his face, he had not come to discuss a scratched car. The moment Alexander Hayes stepped into the lobby, the energy in the room changed again. Conversation stopped. Employees instinctively straightened their posture. Guests who had spent years negotiating with powerful people suddenly looked uncertain. Alexander was not simply another wealthy visitor. His name was on the building. His reputation stretched across the country. And unlike many executives, he rarely appeared without purpose. The billionaire walked calmly across the marble floor. No security detail surrounded him. No assistants rushed ahead. The measured sound of his shoes echoed softly beneath the chandeliers. He glanced briefly at the security footage still displayed on the tablet. Then he looked toward Michael Reed. "Sir," he said, extending his hand, "I owe you an apology." The entire lobby froze. Michael blinked in surprise. "You do?" Alexander nodded. "This happened in my hotel. That makes it my responsibility." For a moment, nobody spoke. Not because the statement was complicated, because it was rare. Powerful people often defended institutions. Few accepted accountability for them. Michael slowly shook his hand. "Thank you." Alexander turned toward the hotel manager. "Make sure Mr. Reed's delivery is completed immediately and that he is treated as our guest for the remainder of the evening." "Yes, sir," the manager replied quickly. Then Alexander's attention shifted toward Emily Carter. She stood quietly beside the reception desk, almost uncomfortable with the spotlight now falling on her. She had not defended Michael expecting recognition. In fact, part of her wished she could return to work and disappear into the normal rhythm of the evening. Alexander studied her for several seconds. "You are Emily Carter?" She nodded. "Yes, sir." "How long have you worked here?" "Almost 3 years." Alexander glanced around the lobby. 3 years. He repeated it as though considering something important. "And tonight you were the only person willing to challenge an assumption that everyone else accepted." Emily shifted slightly. "I just did what I thought was right." A faint smile appeared on Alexander's face. That answer explains everything. Nearby guests listened carefully. Victor Langford remained silent. For perhaps the first time all evening, he seemed unsure where to look. The confidence that had fueled his accusations earlier had completely vanished. Yet Alexander did not address him immediately. Instead, he turned toward the crowd. His voice remained calm, but every word carried through the lobby. "I watched this situation from the executive floor." A ripple of surprise moved through the room. "I watched dozens of intelligent people form conclusions before they had evidence. I watched assumptions become facts. And I watched a delivery driver forced to defend himself against something he never did." Nobody interrupted. Nobody dared. "But I also watched something else," Alexander continued. "I watched a waitress risk her position to protect a stranger. I watched a concierge find the courage to speak when remaining silent would have been easier. His eyes moved across the crowd. Character reveals itself in moments like these. The statement landed heavily. Several guests lowered their gaze. Others reflected quietly on their own choices. Because deep down, many realized they had not been spectators. They had been participants. Every person who looked away had made a decision. Every person who stayed silent had contributed to the outcome. Alexander finally turned toward Victor. The lobby seemed to hold its breath. Mr. Langford. Victor forced a smile. Alexander. Surely this was all just an unfortunate misunderstanding. The billionaire regarded him for a moment. The scratch was a misunderstanding. His voice remained perfectly controlled. What happened afterward was not. Silence followed. Heavy. Unavoidable. Outside, the rain began to slow. The lights of Manhattan reflected across the wet pavement beyond the glass entrance. Inside the Grand Hayes Hotel, something far more significant than a damaged vehicle had been exposed. The footage had cleared Michael's name. But the evening was no longer about a scratch on a car. It had become a lesson about dignity, courage, and the price of judging someone before knowing their story. And Alexander Hayes was not finished speaking. Alexander Hayes let the silence linger. He did not rush to fill it. Great lessons rarely need volume. They need reflection. The billionaire looked around the lobby and saw something he had not expected when he first stepped off the elevator. Embarrassment. Not only on Victor Langford's face, but on many others. People were beginning to recognize themselves in the story unfolding before them. That realization was uncomfortable. I have a question, Alexander finally said. His voice remained calm. Why did so many people believe Mr. Reed was guilty before they saw any evidence? Nobody answered. The marble lobby that normally echoed with confidence now felt strangely fragile. Alexander continued. Was it because he was carrying a delivery package? His eyes moved through the crowd. Was it because his jacket was worn? Because his truck was not parked out front? Because he did not look like the kind of person you expected to defend himself? Several guests looked away. The questions were simple. The answers were not. Michael stood quietly beside Emily. He had spent years learning not to take such things personally. Yet hearing someone finally say them aloud stirred something inside him. Not anger. Validation. For the first time that evening, someone had identified the real problem. It had never been a scratch on a vehicle. It had been assumptions. Alexander turned toward Emily. When everyone else stayed silent, what made you speak? Emily hesitated. Hundreds of eyes were now focused on her. The attention felt overwhelming. She glanced briefly at Michael before answering. Because if nobody speaks, then the wrong person carries the burden. The room became still again. Her answer contained no grand speech. No dramatic declaration. Just truth. The kind that people recognize immediately because they wish they had said it first. Alexander nodded slowly. That is leadership. Emily looked genuinely surprised. I am just a waitress. No, Alexander replied. That is your job title. It is not who you are. The words landed deeply, especially among the employees standing nearby. Front desk agents, servers, valets, housekeepers, people who spent every day being noticed only when something went wrong. For them, the statement felt personal. Across the lobby, Victor finally stepped forward. His confidence was gone now, replaced by something far less comfortable. Mr. Reed, he said carefully, it appears I was mistaken. Michael looked at him quietly. The apology sounded incomplete, but it was a beginning. I appreciate that, Michael replied. There was no bitterness in his voice. No desire for revenge. The response surprised many people more than the apology itself. Grace often catches people off guard because they expect resentment. Alexander noticed. So did Emily. Character reveals itself not only in how people are treated, but in how they respond when they finally receive justice. The billionaire glanced toward the manager. Effective immediately, I want every employee in this hotel reminded of a simple principle. He paused. Respect is not reserved for people with money. The manager nodded immediately. Yes, sir. Every guest matters. Every worker matters. Every visitor matters. Alexander looked toward Michael. And every person deserves the benefit of evidence before judgment. Around the lobby, heads slowly nodded. Not because they were being instructed to agree. Because they knew he was right. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. Through the glass entrance, the streets of Manhattan glistened beneath city lights. Inside, the tension that had dominated the evening began to dissolve. Yet something more valuable remained behind. Perspective. People arrived at the Grand Hayes Hotel expecting luxury. Instead, many had just received a lesson they would remember far longer than any meal, conference, or business deal. And for Alexander Hayes, the evening was still not over. Because after watching Emily Carter stand alone when nobody else would, he had reached a decision that would change far more than one night in a hotel lobby. Alexander Hayes looked at Emily Carter for a long moment before speaking again. The lobby remained quiet. Nobody seemed eager to leave. Business dinners had been forgotten. Phone calls postponed. For one unusual evening, the most valuable thing inside the Grand Hayes Hotel was not money. It was attention. "Emily," Alexander said, "tomorrow morning, I would like you to join me for breakfast in the executive dining room." Surprise crossed her face immediately. "Sir." He smiled slightly. That was not a question. A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd, easing some of the tension that had filled the evening. Emily glanced around as if searching for someone else he might be speaking to. "I am not sure why." "Because people spend years teaching management," Alexander replied. "Tonight you demonstrated it." The words settled over the room. Employees exchanged glances. Some smiled. Others looked inspired. Recognition of character was rare. Public recognition was even rarer. Then Alexander turned toward Daniel, the young concierge whose courage had helped uncover the truth. "And I would like you there as well." Daniel blinked. "Me? You?" Alexander nodded. "Finding your voice is difficult. Using it when there is risk involved is even harder." Daniel stood a little taller. Nearby co-workers quietly congratulated him with smiles and nods. For perhaps the first time since starting his job, he felt seen. Michael watched the scene unfold with gratitude he struggled to put into words. A few hours earlier, he had arrived carrying a package and expecting an ordinary delivery. Instead, he had witnessed strangers defend him when they had no reason to. He had witnessed a young employee speak the truth despite fear. And he had witnessed a billionaire value integrity more than status. Life still surprised him, even after all these years. Alexander then faced him once more. "Mr. Reed, I understand you came here to complete a delivery." Michael nodded. "Yes, sir." "Then let us make sure the evening ends better than it began." The billionaire instructed the staff to arrange transportation home after the delivery was completed and invited Michael to enjoy dinner as a guest of the hotel. Michael tried to decline politely. Old habits, pride, self-reliance. But Alexander insisted. "Please allow us the opportunity to do the right thing." This time Michael accepted. Across the lobby, Victor Langford remained silent. The crowd no longer focused on him. In many ways, that was less than enough. Attention had shifted toward people whose actions deserved it more. As guests gradually returned to their conversations, something remarkable happened. Several stopped to shake Michael's hand. Others thanked Emily. A few quietly apologized for staying silent earlier. The evening had changed them. Not dramatically, not permanently perhaps, but enough to matter. Outside, the clouds finally parted. Reflections of city lights shimmered across rain-soaked streets. Yellow taxis moved through Manhattan. The world continued forward. Yet inside the Grand Hayes Hotel, a different kind of progress had occurred. Emily eventually picked up the serving tray she had set down hours earlier. It felt strangely symbolic. She was still the same waitress. Still the same woman who worked long shifts and worried about bills and cared for her family. Nothing about her title had changed. But something else had. The people around her now understood what had always been there. Character. As Michael prepared to finish his delivery, he paused beside Emily. "Thank you," he said quietly. Emily smiled. "For what?" Michael looked around the lobby one final time. For reminding people to look twice before judging once. Neither of them realized that several guests nearby overheard the exchange. But perhaps that was fitting. The most important lessons are often spoken softly. Long after the crowd dispersed and the hotel returned to normal, those words remained. Because wealth can buy influence. Titles can command attention. Success can open doors. But respect is earned in a different way. It is earned when nobody is watching. It is earned when there is nothing to gain. And on a rainy evening in Manhattan, the poorest man in the lobby kept his dignity, while some of the richest people in the room learned its value.